welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Bert Terhart. He is a soldier, sailor, scientist, adventurer, serial entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Bert.
Well, thank you very much, AJ. It's fantastic to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. But and I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit, will learn from what we are going to discuss right now. We'll be learning from you how one can conquer the impossible. And looking at you, looking at what you have done, you are doing, it seems like impossible is nothing. We all can do that. So but before that, we come to this. Let's understand a bit about your journey, about your background, so that people know who they are listening to.
Well, thank you very much, and again, it's just a real pleasure to be here. I've had a knack, it seems, my whole life just for knocking off things that are next to impossible, and I've fallen into them. It's not something I suppose I chose, but like you said, I would identify as soldier, scientist, sailor, serial entrepreneur, and adventure, and every one of those things has been a bit of an accident. And the funniest things in your life drive you forward. I'm actually almost completely colorblind, so that has somehow plagued me my entire life. I always wanted to be in the Navy. It never worked out. They said, when I was in military college, it was, you can be in the Army or in the Army. Well, what would you like to do? So I guess it's the Army, and I figured I may as well do something hard there. So I joined the Special Service Force, which is the Canadian equivalent of I guess the Gurkhas in some ways. And then when I finished in the Army, I decided, how can I make a contribution? So I decided to go back to school, become an oceanographer, because of course I really wanted to be in the Navy and drive a boat. But as it turns out, by the time I graduated with all my degrees, the Canadian government had decided to axe all funding for any shipboard research. So that was the end of my scientific career, because I really just wanted to go to sea. And then because I had some programming skills, I ended up working most of my adult life as an entrepreneur. So and I guess along the way, I've been very fortunate to pursue some of my more serious passions, and like I mentioned earlier, this idea of doing really, really hard things has stuck with me from getting a couple of very difficult degrees in physics and applied math, and of course the Army that I mentioned, and then deciding to sail around the world, and then deciding to sail up to some of the craziest places in the north of Alaska, and then deciding to paddle across a continent. So it's like I said, it's been a very eclectic journey, and it's not something that I could have scripted really at any time in my life.
Absolutely, absolutely. But so, is it the desire, or is it the zeal to conquer the impossible, or is it the lure of the sea that pulls you? Even your children's book is known as Sir Salty Goes to Sea. So why this whole desire to be at sea? Is it going to the sea, conquering things out there? Is it because you wanted to go into the Navy, you had to go into the Army, and then that desire always pulls you even today?
Well, I think it's to be perfectly honest, it's in my blood. My both my parents are Dutch. They immigrated to Canada my father in 1952, and my mom later on in 56, and when they got married. And my father sailed and rowed to school. So from a very young age, all I ever did, as far as I can remember, was get in a boat, or something like a boat, an inner tube or a log or a canoe, and put a sail on it or try to paddle it somewhere. So it's been with me for a very long time. And for whatever reason, I've just been drawn to the ocean. And I grew up in the prairies in Saskatchewan, so there's nothing. So my brother would say there's a lot to look at and nothing to see, because it just gets completely flat. And being at sea is quite a bit like that. But from a more esoteric perspective, I think there's a moral imperative to do hard things, and you can chop that up into the smallest little bits that you can imagine. And if you're a business person or an entrepreneur, and you're ever confused about which way to go, pick the harder path. Because I mean, if it were easy, it would be raining whiskey. And there are no shortcuts in life. There's no such thing as an overnight success. So being drawn to hard things is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, there's a book that's come out just recently called "Do the Hard Things," which I think is a really good book. Although I think they have the definition of tough might be a little bit sideways, but I think that no matter in what context you look, being drawn to do hard things means that you are going in the right path. And you can imagine if let's say that you want to let's say that I want to get stronger and faster, and I'm laying on the couch watching Netflix. Well, the harder thing is to actually get up off the couch, right? And the next hardest thing is to walk to the door, and the next hardest thing is to go outside. So it's really a scale invariant process. And imagine if you will, you had a bunch of soldiers, and of course soldiers have very difficult tasks. So imagine you had a bunch of soldiers who weren't prepared to do the hard things. So when it got hard, they goes, let's go back and sit on the couch and watch Netflix. Or you had someone who's the CEO of your company, someone who's responsible for your wage and driving you forward, and company culture and all those important things, and they're not prepared to do the hard thing. They want to look for a shortcut or go take some other easier path. So for whatever reason, I've been luckily drawn to doing the harder things.
Right, right. So you talk about, choosing the harder things, and you went into lead brain AI.
Hmm.
You are a CEO of that.
Hmm.
I thought AI is there to make our lives easier, and you are. Why did you go into AI? You see that so many things you have done, from armed forces to
Yeah.
to the sea to serial entrepreneurship to artificial. You are looking into the future. I want to understand a bit of your mind, in terms of what made you go into artificial intelligence. That will
Well,
put a lot of people still on the couch. They will not keep on watching things rather than getting onto the ground. I thought you will do something business around the sea.
well, I had mentioned that when I left academia, because I couldn't go to sea, I was going to be stuck behind a computer. I had computer skills because my degrees or my advanced degrees were in large scale oceanic circulation models, which was nothing but writing computer code. And at the time, there was very few people writing computer code. And I had a very good friend, who I still has known him for ever since I was in grade 3. So basically, since I've been 6 or 7 years old. He's a very, very accomplished medical practitioner. And he asked me a long time ago if I would write some code that would help him differentially diagnose a large number of patients at a single time, so that they could triage patients more effectively as they walked into the clinic, et cetera, et cetera. And because I could write code, I did it. And I ended up falling, again, not because I had intended to do that, writing code specifically for healthcare practitioners. And that ended up, at one time, I had 2,500 doctors all across the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, using software that I had written to help them in their medical practices. And I've just stayed in that particular niche for close to 3 decades now. But I've always been involved with IT and automation. And that eventually evolved into working very closely, or trying to understand what Google was doing to reward businesses with traffic, which has been important for a very long period of time. And that again devolved into using AI. And AI has been, the term itself seems very trendy, but the fact is that we've been swimming in a sea of AI. No pun intended. Been swimming in a sea of AI for a very long time. And Google when it first came out, was nothing more than really, really low tech, or I should say lowbrow AI. And I recognize it, as an academic for what it was. It was started by a couple of academics who simply were scoring websites exactly the way that scientific papers are scored. So it immediately resonated with me, and it was in essence at that time just AI. So of course, it's just in the last, ever since ChatGPT came out, it's absolutely exploded. And around this year, around this time last year, so basically a year ago, I decided that I would try something really hard, which was to move away from the not move away, but sort of spin off a part of the software business that I am running to Lead Brain, and then bring and in so doing help small businesses leverage AI so that they could more easily accomplish the things or more easily deal with the things that plague them on a day-to-day basis. And I have a soft spot for small business because my father was a small businessman. He was a land surveyor in Saskatchewan, and I know how hard they work. I know how hard it is for them, to do all the things that we typically take for granted if we're just sitting around getting a paycheck. So I've had a soft spot for them, and I, because of my background in programming and IT and understanding, what Google actually, how it works a little bit under the hood, I figured I could leverage AI uh, and make it particularly useful for small business. So that's how I sort of fell into it. And of course I have a technical mindset. So uh, I'm I'm if something is new and challenging and technically bound, then I seem to find myself there. So it's been a fun ride. Of course, there's there's unbelievable advances being made in AI, and it's shocking just how much it's changing the landscape, and shocking how much it's changing the landscape behind the scenes. So it's going to make massive changes in our lives that are going to be incredibly far-reaching. So it's nice to be involved with it at this stage and in the context that I am.
Right, right, Bert. So your story, you make it look very simple. Lots of achievements, lots of things, paddling solo across Canada from the Pacific to Atlantic Ocean, covering more than 7,800 kilometers by foot and canoe. So all
Yeah,
these things, even your business ventures, all
yeah.
these things look like to be a well scripted story, fairy tale story. Never mention about the challenges. Tell us a bit about the challenges. Is it just looking at your face? It looks like that you never faced challenges. Obviously, you did. It is
Yeah.
just your modesty that it does not. Tell us about the challenges that you
Well,
faced, big challenges that you tackled along the way.
okay. Let's put things into some sort of perspective here. So to paddle across Canada, um, I it's 7,800 kilometers. Like you had said, I walked 1,100 kilometers, pulling the canoe behind me, doing all the portages because you simply cannot paddle everywhere. And getting over British, getting through British Columbia, it's all upstream and uphill. So I walked with the canoe, pulling a trailer behind me through winter, through over the mountains, for at least over 680 kilometers, even before, and I'd hardly got started. So that sounds incredibly hard, but in point of fact, all I did was walk. I just kept walking. So the secret is to persist. And I just simply persisted at very, very simple things. And I just chunked everything down to the simplest possible thing that I could do for the longest possible time. So, again, for example, one day of paddling is about 30,000 paddle strokes, 30,000. So, if you're prepared to simply sit there and paddle, which is a mind numbingly simple, brain dead, stupid thing to do, then you will make incredible progress. And exactly the same thing is true in business. Exactly the same thing is true in sailing. I sailed around the world nonstop with no electronic navigation, nothing except a compass, a sextant and a watch, some pen and paper. And I did it you go around at the pace of a slow walk. But if you're willing to persist at that pace, then you're actually going to make it. So again, you have to persist, and you persist in the simplest things. And of course, it's almost impossible to think that, oh, today I'm going to decide to walk across the continent or sail around the world, or today I want monthly recurring revenues to be X. You need to chunk that down into something that your brain can actually grasp. So, and I referred to this earlier, basically it's much easier, it's harder to stand up and then take a step than it is to just sit down and watch the world go by. But if you're willing to take one step and the next step and the next step and the next step, then eventually you will accomplish something amazing. Then one of the ways to, and of course you will have challenges. Of course things are going to get hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. Like I said, if it were easy, if you're raining whiskey, like the old cliche, if it were easy, anybody could do it. The point is, it will be hard, um, and you have to set your mind to that. But you can always get over those obstacles, no matter how big they are, simply by chunking it down to the simplest thing that you can do at that moment that's going to move you forward. And it is absolutely shocking, the strength and the resolve and the resilience and the solutions and the creativity that lives and breathes in each and every one of you and each and every one of us. And if you simply ask yourself honestly, if you ask yourself for that help, if you give yourself permission to receive that help or get that help when you need it the most, you will find it in spades. And the strength that's inside you can turn mountains into so much dust that can be cast aside with just a slight sweep or brush of your hand. And I don't mean that to sound trite or to sound cliche. It's absolutely true. And I'm one of the reasons I've done the things that I've done in the context of adventuring and exploring is not to just to wave my hands at those things, but to actually do them and then live that example. So I mean, as again, before I went on this canoe expedition across Canada, I hadn't been in a canoe for 40 years. It was 40 years ago. I never spent any time at all paddling a canoe by myself. I never had an overland expedition other than being in the army. So everything is stacked up against you. You just have to give yourself permission to say, yes, I can do this. And the things that you're giving yourself permission to do are very, very small. So I'm toying with the idea of writing another book called Boring is Best. And it's because if you're willing to persist at the boring things, then you will ultimately be you'll be successful beyond your wildest imaginations. So imagine if you sat down to write, to do something on Twitter every day, twice a day for the next 6 months. And you could, it doesn't matter what you decide to tweet about. It could be your business. It could be your story. It could be anything. The transformation in your life, in your business, in your relationships will be so great. It'll be so transformative. You'll have no idea. It's impossible to imagine where you will be at the end of that time. However, it's hard to tweet every day for 6 months, twice a day. And over and above that, it's boring, but it is best. So, paddling 20 or 30,000, strokes is if I want to get across Canada, I got to do that. So that's very boring, but boring is best. You want to sail around the world, you got to go very slowly. Sailboats aren't fast. Boring is best. If you want to, I have a friend of mine who is a very successful software company out of Calgary, Alberta, here in Canada, with 250 employees, well over 150 million dollars a year. And during one of the oil crunches, which is, it's a boom or bust economy in Alberta. It's a resource based economy. It's all based on oil and gas. And of course, oil and gas goes up and down. Like I said, it's a boom and bust economy. So they were looking for money. And so they asked this guy what his business plan was. And his business plan was simply to persist. So, well, we're not going to give you any money. And he said, well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have someone with a fancy business plan who quits when things get hard? And they go, no. Would you rather have someone who's unwilling to persist through the boom and the bust periods that this sector of the economy is prone to? And they say no. We'd rather have someone to persist. So he went through about 10 different things. I won't bore you with them, but in point of fact, persisting is a really good thing. And if you're willing to persist at the boring things, then that's best.
Right. So how do you bring that balance between persisting on achieving the impossible or letting sometimes things go?
Okay,
What
so
is the barometer here?
Okay, so that's a really insightful question, and there's something that I call the 4 Ps, and it's plan, prepare, practice, and persist. And it's a positive feedback loop, and it's you can apply it in any context, and again, it's scale invariant, big or small. So the idea is simply that you plan something. So you have a goal, you make a plan. Doesn't matter if the plan is good or bad, but you need a plan, and then you start preparing, whatever that means, whether it's, you're preparing physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whether you have to prepare financially, whatever the case might be, start preparing. And then you practice whatever that is, and then you persist. And then at this point, you go plan, prepare, practice, persist. You're now back at the planning stage. And if at the persist stage you look back at your plan and you're going in the wrong direction, or you're not, your plan seems to be not working out, then you have the opportunity to slightly adjust your plan and then repeat. So it's very easy to determine if it's time to quit, stop persisting, if the plan that you had set out originally is wildly different than the outcomes that you have after you've done the planning, preparing, practicing, persisting. So there's this constant evaluation, this constant feedback that you have that tells you if you're on the right path or not. And of course, you should always be making small changes to the plan, because otherwise situations are always different. But clearly, if everything is going sideways, or if you find yourself in an arena or a circumstance that's wildly different than what you planned for, then it's time to switch gears. And switch gears might be to actually stop. And what's interesting about that is that when you have to make those difficult decisions to stop, and you can imagine that I have a problem with the with the idea of quitting. It's incredibly easy because it's unbelievably obvious, and it's obvious at that time. It's not obvious, of course, before you set out, but it's incredibly obvious when you get back to that, to the end of that loop, the plan, prepare, practice, persist loop. So that's how I'm always measuring that I'm going in the right direction, and that's how I'm always measuring if I should be quitting or not, because quitting isn't a bad thing. Sometimes quitting is the most important thing. In the same way that no is probably the most powerful word in the English language, because it speaks boundaries. It keeps you out of trouble. You know, so you need a mechanism that allows you to say no gracefully and say no at a time when it's most appropriate to say no. And that's like I said, those 4 P's have stood me in good stead for a very long time.
Right, right. Well explained. But now, in terms of managing life, managing things, managing business, managing
Mm.
whatever people find difficult to manage even one life. You have so many lives. So, sailors, scientists, adventurers, even this whole business writer, how do you manage all these things at the same time or at different time maybe, but at least there are a couple of things all the
Hmm.
time that is happening in your life. How do you do that? Because if you go out in the sea, something happens there, who is going to manage it? So that is always on your mind,
Yeah,
how what is your philosophy so that people can also take some time off from their businesses? Nowadays people find it difficult to
yeah.
go away from their businesses.
Well, I think you have to be. That's a really good question, because it's difficult for people to find balance in their lives, no matter if they're juggling 2 things or 20. And the secret is discipline. You have to be disciplined, and you have to be able to say no, and you have to be able to say no to those things that are seemingly most important to you. So fundamentally, in this day and age, you need to say no to putting your phone down, and you need to ensure that you get time away from those things that seem to be dragging through your life. It's a very difficult thing to do, but I've been very lucky to like I said, my parents were Dutch, so it was they were pretty strict and old school sort of Dutchmen, and that discipline has stood me in good stead. And again, like I had mentioned earlier, I was in the army at a young age, so that was sort of of course you can't be in the army and do those kinds of things without being highly disciplined. And then academia is the same way. So um, you simply need to structure your life so that you're constantly focused on the things that are most important as opposed to the things that are unimportant, and then decide at 5 o'clock I'm going to quit, or I'm going to start at 3, or whatever the case might be. And setting those boundaries for yourself and using that magic 2-letter word no, then that will help you stay focused on the task at hand. And I think you would find, if people choose to do that, like religiously, and I mean that specifically, I'm using that word specifically. If you do that religiously, then you will find that firstly your life you'll be 100 times, well, you'll be far happier. I can't say 100%, 100 times happier, but certainly far happier. And you'll find yourself to be more productive, and you'll find yourself with more time to be more creative. But the root of it is simply discipline.
Right, right, Bert. Now, let's understand success. You keep on
Mm.
moving, you keep on going, you keep on overcoming, all those impossible tasks and achieve success. What has been your idea of success? Someone who is an explorer and an adventurer, what can be their idea of success? What should be my idea of success? How should we look at success, especially when we have surmounted impossible things, achieved impossible things?
Well, I mean, again, that's a really really good question, and people don't ask me that very often, and I'm a little surprised by that because fundamentally, fundamentally, you have to be divorced from the outcome in order for you to achieve any measure of success. So if I so I enjoy the process. I the success for me lies in engaging in the process, whether it's learning, or whether it's in the case of lead brain, maybe it's scaling. In the case of sailing, just literally getting from A to B, and B doesn't matter. But we are not in charge of the future. I have no control over the future. I cannot say with any degree of certainty whatsoever what's going to happen tomorrow. So why would I pin everything on what's going to happen tomorrow? I can only pin my my idea of success or accomplishment on what's happening right now. So I'm completely and utterly absorbed in the process, and I am try to be absolutely religious and disciplined about divorcing myself from the outcome. So I mean, you can say, well, let's say that I had wanted to sail around the world and I never made it, and it would have been very easy for me not to make it because the boat could break, I could get sick, the list goes on and on and on. Because I never made it, that doesn't mean the trip is not a success. There's one element of the trip being successful was actually getting around the world. For example, 200 let's say it took me 265 days to do it. There's 265 other ways to define the trip as a success, because waking up every day with a boat of one piece in God's fantastic amazing creation is another definition of success. So if you look just at the outcome, that's a unidimensional, single variate, understanding or thinking of what success is. But if you're totally absorbed and engaged in the process, then every single thing that you accomplish, no matter how big or small, in that process is a success. I mean, you always hear, I mean, it's cliche again to hear that you have to celebrate, the small successes along the way, but it's absolutely true. So that's my definition of success. It's the tiny successes along the way that add up like, like grains of sand on a beach, so that they be, your successes are innumerable on the way to whatever you've set out to, whatever you set the outcome to be. But again, the outcome is independent of how you should be defining success, whatever it is that you're endeavoring to do.
Right, right. And I want to understand your feeling, uh, walking into the path of these great people, all those, world great explorers and cartographers. When you move into that whole same destination, same sort of a thing, how do you feel? Do you feel their souls around you
Mm.
telling you something? Or
Oh,
I'm sure it's a very different sort of people feeling. People, yeah. What was your feeling? I want to understand. Amidst all this, sea and sea and sea, a lot of
yeah.
sea around you.
Oh, yeah. You're absolutely right. It's well, firstly, it's tremendously humbling to be, because it's not, you've stripped away every comfort that you can possibly imagine that we normally surround ourselves with. So you're incredibly vulnerable, as they were, back, 200, 150, 300 years ago. You are reduced to your very basics, as they were. And then you get this. It doesn't take you very long to understand how unbelievably competent these people were. Like, we think of ourselves as morally superior, we think ourselves technologically superior, we have this idea that we are so much better than everyone else who's come before. And that is in some ways, of course, some elements of those might be true, but in many other ways it's absolutely unequivocally false, because they were unbelievably good at what they did, just shockingly good. And as an example, I tried to duplicate some of the survey results just figuring out where I was using a sextant, a pen and paper, like some of the Canadians, great explorers like David Thompson or Fiddler or Fraser or Mackenzie, and it was impossible for me to come even close to their levels of accuracy, despite the fact that I had way better instrumentation, despite the fact that I wasn't doing it with basically with a charcoal twig on a piece of birch bark, literally, that I didn't have to do it with log tables. I had, so it was shocking to me at how good they were at what they did. So number one, that's very humbling. And as soon as you find yourself in that space where you're very humble, then the world seems to come flooding seems to start flooding into your being. So when you said you feel the soul of those people who have come before, that's exactly what you feel. But you feel it coming at you again, if you'll excuse the pun, in waves. It's just this enormous it's just this enormous realization of how close you are to the experiences of those early explorers and indigenous people in Canada, of course, because they had a massive role to play in putting Canada on the map. And it's I call them thin places where you're not very far removed from those things in life that are far greater than you. And it's when I say that, it's not something that should make you feel small, but it makes you feel part of something that's incredibly grand and amazing. So, for example, standing on the deck of a small boat at sea, literally thousands of miles from land. The closest person to you is 200 miles that way on the International Space Station. And the sea and the heavens and the stars, the planets, the moon, everything is there just for you. You're the only person seeing that. You're the only person getting to witness that. And it seems like the whole thing is just one giant e-ticket ride at Disney just for you. And so you feel, firstly, small, of course, because you are small, very humble, of course, because you should be humble and grateful. But secondly, incredibly privileged to be part of this amazing grand design that's mind-numbingly beautiful. So it's like you say, it's you feel your soul being moved, this way and that way, east, north, south, east, and west, by all those people who have come before.
Of course, your soul being hugged by the great people that were
Yes.
there,
Yes.
who paved the way for you with
Yes.
whatever way they saw things.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why perhaps you also want to leave something for the future. That's where your children book comes. Sir Salty goes
Mhm.
to sea. Mr. Good Guy calls himself Salty because of the sea. But what is it that you want to tell through your book? Tell us a bit about your book.
Well, I've written a number of books, but I had because how Salty ended up on Salty is a stuffed seal, so he's basically a child's toy. And how I got it is a bit of an interesting story. But I ended up with Salty, and then after about a month alone, you end up talking to yourself and to other things on the boat. So I ended up having this conversation with Salty, and I started writing about it. I started blogging about it because I was able to send stuff I had written back home, and I wrote something every day. So I was religious and disciplined about that. And I was originally doing it for my dad because I just wanted my dad to keep up with me. And I started writing about Salty, and I gave him a voice and a character and all these crazy things. And pretty soon, everybody was more interested in Salty than they were in the actual trip, which is fine with me. It was interesting to see how people had the traction that Salty had gained. And when I came home, I thought about that really a lot. And virtually, more than a third of every email I got was asking about Salty, how's Salty doing? There was 3,000 children or 3,500 kids that followed me on the trip around the world, and then another 3,500 with a trip across Canada. And Salty went on that trip as well for a short while until I sent him home. But it turns out that when you do something that's so extreme, like disappear over the horizon for 265 days by yourself sailing a small boat, that's very hard to relate to. But everyone can relate to a stuffed animal, for comfort, a stuffed animal for a toy. So I think everyone related to Salty because, who doesn't, as a small child, who didn't have, an imaginary friend or who didn't have something, that would give you comfort when things got sort of, sideways and bad. So people, I think, really, really related to Salty. And so that ended up being, people had encouraged me to write a book about that. And So I did. Sir Salty Goes to Sea, and it's basically a rehashing, I suppose, of all the trouble that Salty got into when he was sailing around the world. So
Absolutely. So new book coming, and for so new things happening, new things on the horizon.
yeah.
What is it that you seek for yourself? But now with behind all the successes, with everything, what is it that you seek for yourself now?
Well, I guess simplistically, I ask myself, I've got 6 or 7 or 8 months, or 6 or 7 months. What can I do that's interesting? So I come up with these ideas that I think are interesting, and then I try to get them done. And as I've mentioned too, the interesting things tend to be pretty hard. But basically, I'm a lifelong learner. I just cannot stop learning, and I love Canada. I'm just incredibly blessed to live in this country. I'm incredibly blessed to you know to have parents who, well, I've just been unbelievably lucky. And I've it's not just and and I guess it's, and maybe this is as a result of being in the army, because there's the pointy end of the stick, which might be the infantry guy in a trench, but he's not the only person. Like I said, he's a sharp end of the stick, but there's a thousand people behind him. And that's true everywhere that you step in Canada. And um, everywhere you look, you're reminded of the people that have come before and had laid the foundation for everything that I now get to enjoy. And I'm I'm absolutely passionate about trying to shed some light on those people who've come before, who've turned Canada into what it is and helped make it what it is. And certainly that has to do with Indigenous people that have lived, loved, and thrived in an incredibly hard place. Like, Canada is an incredibly hard place to live, unbelievably difficult place to live, and yet there were people here who managed to live these extraordinary lives in an extraordinarily difficult country. So I'm fascinated by that, and I'm constantly trying to learn more about that. And of course, they have a longest coastline in the world, so that speaks to the sailor in me. And then there's all this great giant landmass covered in water, which sort of speaks to me. So I just cannot stop myself from trying to discover more about the giants whose shoulders I stand on. And I think that we owe it to history, and I certainly, Canadians, I think we owe it to our own history to at least appreciate in real depth, um, how we actually got here, whose shoulders we're standing on, and what it is that we should be grateful for. So I have big plans again this summer, and then the summer after that. So there are always some crazy plan, but um, and it's the same. And I say that I this idea of lead brain, and this idea of all the tech stuff I'm involved in. I'm the CTO for one of the largest medical clinics in Canada. We see 1,000 patients a day. I wrote all the software that does all the patient management and admin management, and blah blah blah. But I just love the fact that this is challenging, and that there's something I need to learn, and I can give back in some in some small ways. So there's two fundamental purposes I think we have. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think the idea of service undergirds all of society. And whether you're serving your family, whether you're serving your children, whether you're serving your employees, or whether you're serving your customers, your patients, serving your country. I was a soldier. Whether you're a citizen scientist, because that's one of the reasons I'm also very adamant about that sort of thing. This idea of services and duty is something that underpins everything that has brought us to this place, that allows us to live in this amazing life that we have, this incredibly privileged life, like literally living like kings of old. So I'm fascinated by that, and I want to make sure that I pay my dues, and I'm serving in a way that's I think that I best can.
Absolutely. There is so much to learn about life, about success,
Mm,
about business, about AI, about so many things, about salty and so many things. So a lot of people who would like to, connect with you, learn more from you, about your next adventure,
mm.
about all the good things that you are doing. What's the best way for them to connect with you, Bert?
Well, I mean, you can if you go to bertterhart.com, there's some stuff there, and from there you can sort of go everywhere. If you Google my name, heaven forbid there's way too much there, but there's lots there too. So you can engage, in something or find something that that might pique your interest. And of course, you can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Again, just my name, or people. I have a rule, and the rule is that if you email me, I will email you back. So if you bert.terhart at gmail.com, I'm happy to connect and talk to just about to anyone really, because it's I always find that there's something to be learned from everyone that I've ever met, and it's incredibly humbling because people underestimate their own story, and it's because they live it. They do it every single day, and who can be interested in what I do every single day? But that is as far from the truth as you can possibly get. I've never been in a place and never been in any circumstance that I can recall when I've not been incredibly humbled by the people that I've been fortunate enough to meet. So if you're willing to email me, then of course I'm willing to email you back. And I mean, I still have, I mentioned earlier that there was, thousands of kids that followed me, and they still email me. The rule then was, if you email me, I'll email you back. And they still do. I still have emails that I have to answer from these kids, and of course I look forward to it. It's a real privilege to engage with these great little minds, and or great little people who have big minds and have big adventures planned and big goals. So there's all kinds of ways to get a hold of me. Like I said, bertterhart.com, or bert.terhart at gmail.com, or Google my name, and there'll be lots there to chew on.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope we can do it again.